So welcome to another session of Faith Through Lockdown. This time we're talking to folk who are involved in the private sector or who own their own businesses and their experiences as Christians in lockdown. So guys, would you like to introduce yourselves? Let's start with you, Steve.
Yeah, I'm Steve Braithwaite. I work in a design consultancy in electronics. I've been doing so for 20 years, spent some time at the university as well.
Rob, how about you next?
Rob Swindell. So I work for an engineering consultancy, mainly in sort of energy, oil and gas, renewables, that sort of stuff.
Okay, Phil.
Hi, I'm Phil. I'm a transport planner, work for WSP, another engineering consultancy, and yeah, just help things get built, I suppose.
Just transport planning, is that seriously as dull as it sounds, or is it quite interesting, Phil?
It's quite varied. There's very much, you either work for the private sector or you can work for public sector in terms of with council. So there's a wide variation, especially within our team as well, which is really interesting. And, you know, you help national government. So yeah, you kind of find out what's going on.
Yeah. So what are you doing at the moment?
So currently I'm help supporting one of the inland border facilities down in Dover, which is quite a politically sensitive topic in terms of
you're basically building a Brexit car park, is that right?
It's not a car park, it's an inland border facility. It's not known as a lorry park. Otherwise people just think there's going to be lots more traffic. Okay. And then also helping with London Resort, which is a theme park near Ebbsfleet.
Okay, there you go. And Mike, what do you do? I'm
an architect, work for a practice called Snug Architects, based in Tottenham.
Okay. So guys, what have lockdown highs and lows, Steve? Why do you get us going? Lockdown highs and lows for you.
Was that for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the high must be actually selling my company, Ash Wireless. Its name is ASH Wireless, and the ASH come from the three daughters, arranged in a helpful, pronounceable way. And if we hadn't done that, and if we hadn't have been starting negotiations 18 months ago, there's a good likelihood we'd actually be finished by now. So that was a high. I think low, yeah, it is just the first few months were just entirely dislocating. Can't go to a coffee shop, can't see grandchildren, children, and yeah, that's wearing thin still. So, do
you want us to edit out that seeing your grandchildren came lower than being able to go to a coffee shop? Like
they're too young to notice. I wouldn't worry.
Okay, Rob, lockdown highs and lows.
It's probably the opposite sides of the same coin, really. So I'm a bit of an introvert. So working from home, once I got over the sort of the guilt feeling of not being in the office, I found that quite good to start with, and I could get a lot accomplished and so on. But as time has gone on, I think I've found it harder and harder in terms of just not having the interaction with friends, with colleagues, with the sort of the passing conversations that you have. They just don't happen. People, when you have a conversation with someone online, it's usually very specific, and it's very time bound, and it's different to the sort of conversations you have when you just bump into somebody in the office, or you bump into somebody when you're out down in Portsmouth High Street or something. And it's I think the sort of sense of isolation, growing sense of isolation, I found quite hard.
Yeah, the barriers in a Zoom call are infinitely high. You can't hear over them.
Yeah, and I think the other. I was talking to my brother-in-law at the weekend, and he's the same. In this current work environment, it's all done through pretty much through Teams, and you just get block booked. You have one team call after another, and there's no time to stop. And it's literally, this is your world, and it just feels like every day is just Groundhog Day again.
Do you finish your meetings like 5 minutes before the hour. That's what we've been trying to do. Is you book a meeting for 2 o'clock till like 2:55 to give yourself that 5 minutes where you can get away from your screen, go get a drink, go to the toilet, get some food or whatever. That's what we've been really encouraged to do.
Funnily enough, someone said that to me last Friday, and I thought, what a brilliant idea. I wish someone had told that to me sort of, back in March last year. So yes, I've now got my Outlook calendar, so it automatically knocks that 5 minutes off at the end of each hour. But yeah, it is just become increasingly hard, I think. So
the lockdowns have felt different as you've gone along.
Yeah, I think the first one we were sort of learning as we went, really. Whereas I think with this one, it's just something, you know what it's going to be like, and you know what you're going to face, and you still don't know quite when it's going to finish. And before it was, well, we never knew if we were going to come out in a week or 2 or 3, and it was all a bit new. And I was fortunate enough that we had plenty of work on and keeping busy, and the girls, my 2 girls, were able to pretty much look after themselves in terms of their homeschooling. They're old enough to do that. They're fortunate that they've got the technology to do it. I think it's just a lot harder if you're not fortunate enough to be in that camp for whatever reason. And I think but this time around it has felt harder. Our eldest is thinking about university, and not able to visit universities, not doing everything virtually, not knowing what A levels are going to look like this year. Really hard.
I think there's more fatigue on this one, even if we all know the drill now. So it's not fleshing around how do you do it so much, but it is, it's wearing because it's compounded on top of the previous ones.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I've personally, I felt a lot more tired this time around, and you're always learning how to do something. The first, back March, April, May last year, but this time it just feels like the same old, but just immensely tired a lot of the time. And yeah, it's just got increasingly hard as time has gone on, I think.
Yeah, I think people are focusing very much on just getting through at the moment, aren't they? I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Lockdown highs and lows for you, Phil?
I suppose highs have been run a few half marathons and stuff like that. That's been really good fun. And we got the London Resort application was due at the end of last year, which is DCO. So it kind of gets submitted. Someone then has to accept it, and then it takes another 18 months or so. But that was a lot of work, and it's a huge scheme, and that was quite a proud moment to get it done. There was lots of like 11 o'clock finishes around December time. I didn't really see Becky at all, but getting it done was quite nice.
Working from home.
We're both working from home, and I was starting at 7:30, finishing at about 11:30 for a few weeks in a row. So that was quite interesting way of working. But I suppose when it first started, the first lockdown, I had just come off chemo about 6-7 months before. So I was very used to just being at home. Very, very used to just not doing anything. So being able to go out running again was really joyful anyway. Just being able to go out, do stuff. So I was quite used to it. And now talk about this lockdown, it's not as easy, but there's sport on this time. So at least when you're at home, there's something to watch. So yeah, kind of watch a bit of everything. So football, cricket, tennis, rugby. I'm quite happy. And so yeah, I go through days of feeling a bit rubbish, but I know that I've got it. I'm all right, and I feel more sorry for my colleagues who are living on their own or living in a shared house who don't really like the people they live with. And yeah, we've had a few conversations the last couple of weeks with people who are really, really struggling, and that's low because I like my colleagues. I get on very well with them, and that's quite hard to hear.
Yeah. Lockdown highs and lows for you, Mike?
Well, the easy low is 2 full-time jobs, 3 school kids, and homeschooling. And I think it's, in some respects it's funny, in other respects it's not, and it's actually very, very, very difficult. I think the expectations that come around that, and just either feeling like life, this, what was it, the book, the Secret or of the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Well, that's very difficult to jam all those things up and then try and live an unhurried life. I think just keeping your eye on the overall well-being of your kids in that scenario, I think it's and actually achieving, I think, is very difficult.
How old are your kids? How old are your two, Mike?
That's on the spot. 11, 9, and 5. Yeah.
Very much right.
So not completely independent learners there, so that they require quite a bit of assistance and motivation. But then on the positive side, I would normally work in the office, almost universally, and we would see it as a bit of a triumph if I came home and was able to eat with the kids once a week. We nearly always eat now as a family. I mean, sometimes we're not eating till 7 o'clock or whatever, but we do nearly always eat together. And when the kids were at school, I was able to walk Scarlett to school and back, and that's not something that I've really experienced in any regularity with any of the other two, and that was actually, it's quite special, and that's, that is quite a fond memory, I think, that I'll take from this time.
Okay. So
certainly a couple of my colleagues have got two younger guys. They've both got 3 young kids at home, and how they juggle work, doing a full-time job and looking after, helping their wives look after the kids, because just about all the kids are homeschooled. I don't know how they do it. It's trying to do that and do a full-time job is mind-blowing, really.
Biscuits and Netflix is kind of 2 strong sort of go-tos, but it's not, you can't rely on that completely. Yeah, I think sometimes you think, gosh, I'm being really successful, I'm covering lots of bases, but if you're desk sharing with a homeschool and trying to Zoom meet a design review and encourage literacy year 1 phonics at the same time, you kind of realize that it's not very easy, and I don't think it really allows you any of that margin or space to sort of think, because you hop to one and dip out of one call. If you are successful to finish 5 minutes before the next one, you dip in, check everyone's all right, but that sometimes feels like just checking everyone's alive and then dipping back into the next pattern.
What do you think is the biggest challenge for the private sector at the moment, Steve? What would you say is the biggest challenge?
I was kind of musing. There was an announcement in the papers, kind of a few weeks ago, that expecting 1 million small businesses to close, to fold as a result of this, and that's just such a huge, devastation for the owners, because that usually involves loss of livelihood in a lot of cases, and investment as well. So just a big challenge for an awful lot of private sector is to find the work and to do it. Some parts of the private sector are doing very well. There's a lot of activity. Others are just kind of completely crumbled. I mean, like the kind of restaurants and pubs and coffee shops and those kind of things are laid off, but laying off and furloughing is not going to help everybody. So.
Just a massive dislocation of demand, really. Yeah,
and it's quite likely to come back in a completely different way. So unless people are both trying to find a way to survive, pay what bills have to be paid, and also work out what's it going to be like when this all stops. Is there going to be the original market left?
And also trying to predict when that change will happen. The rate of change, is it a long gap which you have to dig down for, or is it a short snap that you kind of hold your breath for? And I think particularly at the beginning of lockdown, that was all the question of when we get back to normal in September. Well, September then becomes Christmas, becomes Easter, potentially becomes next September, and I think the unknown duration makes it very hard to plan for those eventualities.
Yeah.
unknown duration and completely uncertain market conditions, because who knows what's coming next, really.
Yeah.
I guess.
Mm.
How's it in
For
the,
us, oh,
yeah, go for it.
I was just gonna say, for us, it was we kind of, the company kind of went take the short-term hit, but seemingly from about June, July onwards, work's never really been busier. Like, there's lots of government money come in to try and promote walking and cycling, lots of little, as you can see around Southampton, with the site pop-up cycle lanes and pop-up bus lanes that, I mean, members of my team were a part of, and other bits and
You're going for the
pieces.
controversial stuff, aren't you? Brexit
I
car
know.
parks and cycle lanes disrupting.
I wasn't involved in the cycle lanes, others were. So yeah, no. So it's very much that it's just because obviously to fund a growth of the economy and those sorts of things, government funds infrastructure. So for us, it's just not stopped. But it's trying to look at things in a slightly different way, of trying to be more sustainable travel focused, even though we can't go on the bus or the train at the moment. You know, you're trying to still look at things in different ways. That's what I've noticed, is that it's still 100 mile an hour, but let's try and think slightly differently to how we were thinking, especially with city centres and those ideas, because of the fact that businesses are going, and how do we keep businesses in the city centre? How do you keep the footfall going? Do we pedestrianise areas, or do we let free parking? And there's lots of different ways of thinking about it.
Do you think there'll be a move to turn many shops into residences? Is that another way of
yes, I think there's been a few, and offices into residential, because it's a really quite a simple planning move. You don't really need to do any transport work to do it. You just have to get the planning consent. I believe it's quite easy, and that's one way of revitalizing city centres, I suppose, is by bringing in more residents to then mix use the area rather than just having it as a commercial area.
But I guess the move to working from home will have a massive impact eventually on the housing stock, because very few of our houses were actually set up for working from home.
Yeah.
How about you, Rob? You in an industry that is going to be forced to change, in the oil and gas industry. How is the feeling in that sector at the moment?
I think it depends which bit of the sector you work in. So new design projects are sort of few and far between. A lot have stopped or have been sort of downgraded or put on a back burner. I mean, we're quite fortunate in our team in that we do a lot of work to support operational assets. So, you've still got to keep things going and stop things falling apart and failing. Otherwise, you can have a major safety or environmental problem. So we've been quite fortunate in our team, and but you can see on the horizon the changes that are coming. And the company I work for, Wood PLC, they've repositioned themselves quite a lot over the last 3 or 4 years in terms of much more work in terms of renewables, in terms of so at one point probably 80% of their business was oil and gas related. Now it's about 30%. So it's a big shift over the last 3 years. So they were fortunate in terms of doing that early. But I think for us as a team, because we're a small team, small part of a big company, and we've been fortunate in terms of keeping busy. But we've taken on, last year we kept the commitment to take on some new graduates, some new engineering graduates. And there are two things there. First of all, it's not easy bringing in new graduates into a virtual team. You need that face-to-face time to be able to mentor and look after them. And quite often as well, if they've been at university somewhere else, they're coming to Southampton, they're in digs, they're trying to sort of work from digs. It's not a good environment to work from.
Harder to build relationships when you don't have the conversations,
Yeah.
Because the Zoom meetings are very task or project focused rather than relationship building.
Yeah, absolutely. So trying to find ways around that. Also very conscious that some of their peers who were offered jobs at other companies last January, while they were still at university, those job offers were withdrawn as they got into the summer. So you're hitting a swathe of graduate, educated, graduates who have come onto the market, and suddenly there's not a job where they thought there would be, and I think that's really hard.
There's a lot of redundancies of slightly older graduates who are.
So there's a whole cohort there who are looking for work, who in the normal sort of environment would be straight into paid employment, and now are really struggling. So it's I think our biggest challenge is how you sort of keep bringing through that younger talent and encourage them and integrate them into the workspace, into the teams, which is something that's really easy to do when you're all in an office, but when you're all working from home, it's blooming difficult.
I think the Zoom meetings can sustain a team. I think it must be very, very hard to join a team or to create a team in that environment.
That's right.
Given these are the circumstances in lockdown, how has your faith been helping you through lockdown, Steve? Let's start with you.
Very, very good question. For me, it just has to throw me onto the Lord in saying, Lord, help. There's not much more than that. I mean, certainly, early lockdown times, we were just praying, give us today our daily bread, in a sense of, bring opportunities to our door, help us to identify where business is, because we don't actually know what we're doing in 2 months' time, and we can't pay the bills a month after that. And it gets that close in a small company, as I suspect Mike can also testify to. It's been a huge relief, obviously, to be acquired by a larger company where you get somebody anxiously asking you about where the business is, rather than being able to not afford to pay people.
And have you really noticed a difference in your stress levels going from an owner to an employee?
Yeah. There was quite a large weight which I didn't really realise was there. I was, it just kind of got lifted, and I'm only working part time now as well. So it's a privileged position to be in, but I look across to other small companies around, and they could be doing fine through having some good opportunities, or madly scrambling to work out how to run the business over the next few months.
And that's the crazy thing. I mean, I remember talking to you, Mike. I mean, Snug was doing really well before the lockdown, and it's not because of anything that Snug did that it was suddenly really challenging. So it's just that shift in the environment is so complete. And so you're talking about these small companies that were probably really viable, and then suddenly might be disappearing. You said 1 million small businesses are likely to go out of business, what, this year, or through the pandemic, Steve? I think you.
I don't know whether they were the way of the figures, but there are so many, and I suspect large groups of the entertainment and sort of arts industries are just completely taken out. Whereas in some respects, there, from our architecture point of view, lots of things get put on hold, where everyone suddenly looks at each other thinking, what's happening, what are we doing? Let's just not make a decision this month or next month. Let's push that decision down the line. But at some point there builds a pressure that people will need those things, and that will kind of come back up, and the pressure will rise again. But I think that's harder for certain industries where actually the very act of bringing people together for those things is just very, very difficult at this time, and therefore that's a real unknown, hold your breath sort of situation, and I suspect that's probably where the greater casualties are.
How about you, Rob? Has faith been helping you through lockdown?
I think it's given me I found the sort of the time I take in the morning before I start work, just to have a little bit of downtime and just read and pray and think about the day, has been really important. Just finding that the space. It's very easy when you've got your laptop at home, you've got everything. It's just the other side of the door to get up, have breakfast, and then I'll just check email, and I'll just just get on with work basically. But to have that almost that ring fence time first thing, I've been really grateful for. And it's been great just being. So I tend to go and sit in the kitchen, and there's no one else around, and read, pray, and it's been great that it's been getting lighter in the morning. So by 7 o'clock, there's light coming into the kitchen, and it's I found it quite an uplifting part of the day, really, before getting into what really does feel like the hamster wheel. So that's really helped. That just ring fencing that bit of time at the start of the day.
And like me, you also got persuaded to buy a dog by your family.
Yes. So dog walks. Although to be fair, during the week, Maggie and the girls well, Maggie in particular is good at taking sort of frontline duties with the dog. Weekend is when I tend to get mainly.
I definitely see more of Maggie than you with the
dog. But certainly last summer or last spring summer, when it was lighter in the evenings, finishing work and then being able to take the dog out for a walk and just walk around the common and just appreciate being out in a bit of greenery, and just being very grateful that we've got that on the doorstep, and just appreciate creation, really. Bit more difficult in the winter, harder in the winter.
I think it's just a matter of layers, but there you go.
Yeah, well, that's true.
How about you, Phil?
So in the first lockdown, I just kind of woke up, went straight to work, and it just kind of went tunnel vision and stuff. But actually, so in the summer, I was fortunate to be able to go back into work, and I used my commute into work. It's about a half an hour, 40-minute walk, to listen to Bible notes, like those sorts of things. And I realized I really missed it because it was my thinking time, and sort of thing. So once we were then kind of sent back at home, or the days I was working at home, because it was only like 1 or 2 days a week I'd go in, I used to, and I still do, I just go around the bottom. So we live in the flats in Bitton Park, and around the bottom of the flats area, I just wander around there and I listen to stuff and I think, and it's so nice by the water and those sorts of things, and it just gives you my space back, because I personally like to do those things in the morning. It gives me my thinking space, my head space, and then it kind of clears the head ready for the day.
It's interesting because Jackie, who was in one of the other calls, said that she starts work at 6 and then she has a cup of coffee, I think, and she said, and then she goes out deliberately to go for a walk, which is kind of her commute. And in that, she listens to podcasts, she listens to Lectio 365, and she does similarly. She's structured that into her day because she realized it was just getting completely squeezed out.
Yeah, Lectio 365 has been great, actually. I've plugged into that, and that's been really helpful.
Yeah. Mike, any thoughts?
I think sort of similar. There is, everyone says challenging times, turbulent times, but I think in that you then look around and think, well, what's the answer? And I think sometimes that can be quite paralyzing. Sometimes it can just end up in endless repeat conversations talking about the same thing again and again, and it not going anywhere. I think it then does force you to then take a step back and look up and try and get some perspective. And I think one of the solutions for that kind of paralyzing fear of the unknown and the burden of responsibilities is to remind yourself that God is in control and he is the provider. And I think that is immensely comforting, and I think allows you to hold things a little bit lighter, because I think sometimes the running of a company, as Steve, you said, it can feel like a burden, and I think you can feel the weight of the pressures on yourself and then of others, and realizing that actually you're not entirely alone in that. I think it allows you to relax somewhat into the flow, knowing that there is a backstop, and that God has got plans for you, and he has provided in the past. And I think almost going through that, reminding yourself, is part of then building the sort of faith, I think, to see you through.
I mean, you and Paul, the other director, I can't remember the other director's name, but I mean, you're practicing Christians, you're trying to run the practice on Christian principles. So how has that worked in lockdown, do you think?
I think we often have this challenge. It's very easy, and I probably personality-wise will shift towards trying to do things in my own strength and my own ideas. I think we have sought to trying to hear from God and hear direction and hear inspiration, and that sometimes will manifest itself in the design of a project, but also in how we run the company. And this maybe is a sort of a strange example, but we actually had a lot of bad debt which we've been carrying for quite some time, paid off in about April last year, which was very, very timely and actually gave us some more reserves. But in a sort of what we felt was hearing from the Lord around, well, what should we do? We actually invested some of that money in the stock market, feeling that that's what God was saying specifically for this time, to say, look, I will cover your losses. And we kind of weighed that and took stock and thought that we had this money that we could use, and actually maybe the story is not complete on this one and things go up and down, but that has actually covered our losses for the financial year coming out of that time. And that is something that was a direct hear from God, trust, put it into action, try and do it responsibly. I don't think it will set up a gambling culture or financial plan in the future, because I think it was a very specific word for this time, and therefore we responded to that specific one. But trying to allow God to speak, not just through, well, he's given you skills and he's given you intellect, but actually to allow direct access to sometimes do things that are not what you would find in a management book. And I think we've tried to use the Bible at times. We've got a picture up on our wall of it's come from a Sunday school, I think, where Jesus said, cast your net on the other side, and to remind us to say sometimes God may ask you to do something that's not what you think is right, but actually have the faith to trust and to try what God might be speaking to you in the running of a business, and that's an ongoing journey. But it does make it does allow faith and direction and relationship with God into what feels like not the environment for God in many companies. But if God is interested in our lives, he's also interested in our business. And if the Bible has something to say about our lives, he also has something to say about how we run our business. And I think that's an exciting journey, and it's arguably more exciting at this point. But I think it's over the past year it's probably tipped into let's not pray for interesting times at the moment.
It's too dangerous.
Remind me, the bad debt was someone owed you significant amount of fees.
It was an unpaid debt from invoices that accrued over time, which we were always told would be paid, but there wasn't, for whatever reason, and knowing only that had accrued up to the point that that was.
So I seem to remember it was an answer to prayer when it came in, but yeah, that's brilliant. how would you encourage your brothers and sisters to pray for you and for people in similar situations at the moment? So maybe you could, any ideas, guys?
Yeah, I think for peace, yeah, peace and clarity and rest in God. A bit like Mike was saying, I think it's easy to thrash around trying to do things that it doesn't produce much motion, but
it's a sense of being content, trusting God, nurturing people, because I think that's something that maybe we should have drawn out, the difficulty in small businesses of having a very personal relationship with those who work for you, and when really hard decisions have to be made, how emotionally difficult that is.
That's right.
I think we found that when things first strike, often sometimes I think if you run a business, your first thought is, what's that doing to the bottom line? Where will the money come from? The cliff edge, which is always measured in a couple of months or whatever when the work is coming, starts to feel much shorter and much more uncertain. And how does that do for the security? I think trying to remember, whilst that is an important issue that needs to be grappled with, trying to remember what does it feel like not in the boardroom? What does it feel like when you hear silence from the boardroom and you don't know whether you've got a job, and trying to walk in everyone's and gather everyone as a team, whilst you also try and deal with these new and unknown sort of challenges, but keeping that perspective of compassion, generosity, but responsibility, and not shying away from difficult decisions when difficult decisions need to be made, but holding the tension of all those things is.
Rob, what would you say how would you encourage people to pray for you and for people in similar situations at the moment?
Partly for wisdom, just in terms of knowing how to react to what's happening right now, but also how to react and manage what appears to be some significant changes in the whole business world going forwards. Things looks like things will be done very differently. It looks like the way we do business will be very different. Markets will be very, who you're working for will be very different. How you do that work, how you get work, and it's a real step change. And knowing how to mold a business to move it in the right direction, to meet some of those changes, requires a lot of wisdom, a lot of foresight, and a gentle touch as well, I think, in terms of managing staff, looking after staff. So just being just wisdom, really. Pray for just the ability to manage that change, because everyone finds change difficult, but if your job is on the line as part of the wider change that's going on in the world, then it's doubly difficult.
How about you, Phil?
I'd say looking at, people for me and my team and people in our team, it's like conversation and for patience as well with people. I think it's very easy to be frustrated as someone's on the other end of the phone, and sometimes you forget that they're a person who's going through lots of different things as well. So it's really important to make sure, it's prayer for patience of everybody in the team, and also team spirit. The idea of as was said earlier, you can kind of keep your team together, but adding to it and creating a bigger team spirit is really hard at the moment. And with our team, that's generally quite a young team, it's really difficult in some ways to try and make sure everyone's on board, everyone's pulling in the same direction and stuff like that. So I think to pray for those people. And then I just think it's just pray for hope. The hope that we'll get back to a sense of being able to see our colleagues again, not just see it in the office, but going out for drinks together, those sorts of things, the things that in my line of work, is what makes an office or a team a team. You know, a lot of people would say the work, but actually for us, it's, you know, we really bring each other together because we're actually all really good friends.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. What in the conversation about the university, Rachel Morse was saying one of the things she wants people to pray for is the return to campus, because pretty much everything other than the academic work has been stripped out of university life. But university life is much more than just the academic. And so she was asking us to pray for the return of students and staff to campus and the resumption of those relationships as you're describing. Yeah. I mean, I always, when I pray for people's businesses, I pray for the Lord to grant you favor. Trusting that you are trading justly, I pray for prosperity and favor for all businesses that are trading justly. So I think that's something to pray for, and particularly I think for people to understand the pressures upon business owners. If you've never owned a business but you've always been paid at the end of the month, I don't think you understand really the pressures.
And just with that, just to kind of bust in, is to you know, a business owner of reasonable, you know, kind of, you know, certainly a small business owner with kind of 10 or 20 staff or whatever, you're often looking at just something that, as Mike was saying, you know, a couple of months, and you don't actually know where the money's coming from after that. And if it doesn't come then you're into kind of losing life savings or getting rid of everybody, in which case.
Thanks, guys. I think we'll draw it to a close there, but thank you for being so honest. I hope you've enjoyed this series of conversations we've called Faith Through Lockdown. I want to thank everyone who has participated. I was really struck by the honesty and vulnerability with which people shared how lockdown has genuinely been. I loved their humour and their spark and their creativity. I loved how they shared how God has been present, sometimes more clearly than at others, and for sharing honestly how they have lived faith through lockdown. I think one of our challenges today is our inability sometimes generally to enter into another person's world. We're better today, I think, at demanding other people listen to us maybe than we are at being willing to listen to others. I was struck, and one of the reasons for doing this was how little we were entering into the worlds of others. We've been focused so narrowly and tightly on our own. So I've learned a lot through sharing these conversations and reflecting upon them. I've learned a lot about the pressures of being both single and shielding and of homeschooling. I've learned a lot about the pressures within education, and something about the pressures within social work and probation, and something about how it's really been on the front line in the NHS. And I've been really impressed listening to those I've been speaking to. I've often been touched to recognise the heart for others that everyone has shown up, the heart for those among whom they live, and the heart for those they're serving. Maybe the greatest challenge for us in a church dominated by healthcare and education is to be able to enter into the mindset and the lifestyle of someone who's working in the private sector, and particularly entering into the lifestyle and the mindset of someone who owns their own business. I wonder if there's somehow a bit of a cachet in our church to being involved in healthcare and education, you know, things that are self-evidently a good endeavour in which to be engaged, something that feels like they're close to the values of the gospel. Maybe we don't assume that about the practice of business and wealth creation. I wonder if we think it's obviously good to be a nurse, a midwife, or a doctor, or a physio, obviously compatible with the Christian faith, and yet maybe question whether it's obviously good to be a Christian business owner. Yet business can surely be done to the glory of God. There is nothing inherently wrong about making a profit. In fact, some of the parables of the kingdom talk about there being a superabundance of what was sown when we're acting justly, when we're pursuing the kingdom. So I think we should be praying for God's favour on all those who are trading justly. I was struck by the pressures upon those who own their own businesses, struck by both Mike and Steve talking about the cliff edge of having 2 months' work and then nothing. 2 months' work and then nothing to pay their workers, those working with them. So I was struck, as I hope you were, by the weight of carrying your own business. Yes, you have the freedom to pursue what you feel called to do. Yes, you have the freedom to be your own boss, but you also have all of the risk. You also have not just your own household, but others depending on you. You also don't know whether you will get paid this month. So I was struck by how a change in the business weather, if you will, can leave you high and dry. As Steve said, shockingly, 1 million small businesses are expected to fail as a result of the pandemic. And very many of them were perfectly viable prior to the pandemic. A change of the business weather and suddenly they're high and dry. Steve reflected that he was already involved in selling his business, a business that had been going for, I think he said, 15 years. And he doubts. In fact, he thinks it wouldn't have been able to survive alone. As part of a bigger company, it's doing okay. But on its own, he thinks the pandemic would have brought a fruitful, profitable business to an end. And he reflected, I thought, movingly on the weight that had been lifted from him when his business was sold, a weight that he honestly didn't even realize that he was carrying. Mike spoke a little bit about how, as 3 Christian business partners, they often pray and seek God's favor, God's purpose for them. He spoke about how a previous bad debt was paid as an answer to prayer at the beginning of the pandemic, and that this tided them over at the initial really difficult months when work simply dried up. I was struck by the sense that the weather can change and the landscape with it. Demand, Rob, Stephen, Mike all reflected, had simply gone away, but that it might not come back, or might not come back in the same way or at the same level. Rob was reflecting in working in the oil and gas industry about how his firm has gone from 80% to 30% engaged in that market, and it's moved very much into renewables. The landscape has changed, maybe out of all recognition, and businesses simply have to adapt. They spoke about asking for the wisdom and the foresight from God to be able to anticipate what's likely to happen next. That was a real prayer request that was shared. I was struck by Phil's role, often in the public sector, and insulated to a degree from these pressures because the government will always spend on infrastructure. So even in business and the private sector, some industries are more protected from the world around, more protected from those changes in the weather and the landscape than others. I was also struck by how to live as a Christian in business. All of them reflected on how to do teams well. They had a heart for those who just joined. All of them showed compassion and generosity for those whom they were working with, particularly those who just entered the business. And that generosity was marked when they talked about hard decisions having to be made. And Mike spoke about how, as 3 Christian business partners, they commit decisions and direction to the Lord, and that has made a significant real-world difference to their business. So please enter into the worldview and the mindset and the lifestyle of someone owning their own business. Appreciate the pressures, appreciate the worries that can weigh upon them, appreciate the need to always be thinking forward, always to be seeking new work. It is a challenge. It's a challenge that I think those of us who are paid every month without fail maybe don't appreciate. Pray for those seeking to do business to the glory of God. Pray for peace, clarity, and rest in God, for those carrying the responsibility, not just for their own household, but for others. And pray for them to be able to live with integrity in environments that do not always encourage that. And pray for God to prosper the work of their hands, to prosper all businesses that are seeking to trade justly. Pray for them to be able to have a foresight into what's coming next as the weather and the landscape change. And pray that they will all be able to do business to the glory of God. Thanks for listening.